delighted to welcome you back for this session. We'll be talking about the anti-money laundering and the framework of the digital identity in Europe. It'll be a bilingual French and English session. So we'll have our guests who will be speaking their own language. You can, of course, follow our exchange live. And if you'd like simultaneous translation, it is available. And if you can hear the voice of the interpreter, it means that you already have a headset on your head.
I'm going to give you all the devices you will need to follow our debate. Merci beaucoup à nos invités d'être avec nous. J'ai donc
So, next to me I have Stéphanie and also our friend from the European Commission.
So, de la Commission européenne, from the European Commission. Alors, nous allons.
So we shall come back to the both text regulations. We probably have followed other sessions here in the ID&KYC forum, trying to understand what we are talking about, how these texts reinforce the existing situation, providing complementary aspects, how these two regulations come as a synergy and have complementary impacts, how they are addressed, what is the impact on companies, the banking industry, but not only the banking industry, a number of other players are facing this. So how should how the companies adapt, how we can, and maybe we should start with you, Sabine.
And to discuss about the new digital ID framework, to know and to understand what is new in this framework. The microphone is on, so you just use it. And how it will impact business for activities and household life.
Merci. Je m'excuse pour parler en anglais, mais
sorry to speak in English, but it's easier for me.
For inviting me. I feel very honored to sit here with my former boss, actually, Luca, and with my former colleague, Stefan. So yeah, it's almost a family here. So now I work on the European Digital Identity Wallet, and I've been participating in the negotiations of the regulation, which, as mentioned before, was today also endorsed by the Council, and which will hopefully be published in the official journal in May. So maybe let me start with the guiding principles that we followed throughout the negotiations. So, because that was like our parameters for the negotiations. We wanted to create a wallet, or better said, wallets, as we will have probably at least 27 different wallets, not different wallets, 27 wallets by member states that hopefully follow the same technical specifications and will be interoperable. But anyways, these wallets shall be provided free of charge, and they shall put the citizen in control of the data. That's, let's say, the underlying principle. The wallets shall be accepted by both public and private services, wherever authentication is required. And very important, the wallet shall be voluntary. So I think we debated about the wallets the whole day because it is so important that we get them right. Because if we don't get, functionable, efficient wallets that are user-friendly, the truth is that nobody will just use them. So there is no obligation for the citizen to use them. And that's why it's so important to have this discussion and to think about how we can create wallets that are actually attractive to the users. Now, another element I would like to highlight is that in the course of the negotiations, the wallet has become more than an identification tool. I know today we're focusing on identification, but co-legislators advocated to focus a bit more on the wallet functions. So they added, for example, the requirement to establish a dashboard where the user can see the transaction history, where the user can report suspicious activities. It was added to have wallet-to-wallet communication. The idea is that you can share a certificate from one wallet with another wallet. it is also foreseen to provide free electronic signatures, free of charge for non-professional use cases. So now we have to think about all these new elements that came into the proposal and to see how that actually shapes the future of the wallets that we are discussing today. Another request that was important to co-legislators was to enhance the European cooperation. So we don't only have new requirements for the wallet providers that will provide the wallets, but also the governments have to step up and create new supervisory authorities, or at least supervisory tasks when it comes to wallet providers. But also we, the Commission, will be creating the European Digital Identity Cooperation Group. Okay, the name is maybe a bit tricky, but this new cooperation group shall really assist the Commission in drafting the best standards for both digital identification, the wallets, and also for trust services. And they shall help the supervisory bodies with the implementation of the regulation.
One more question, Sabine. How are you addressing the interoperability questions and the mutual recognition between each member states?
The wallets will be based on the same technical standards, and thus they shall be interoperable right from the start. So for us, this is...
This is a point addressed already in the regulation. Raluca Alexandra.
Raluca Alexandra, sur le package, sorry, for the anti-money laundering package, what can we say about this package? What is the contents? What are the key aspects of improvement that we can share with our guests today? Well, first of all, thank you. It is an honor to be here and share with you where we stand in the anti-money laundering package. It's a bit counterintuitive because industry considers that fighting against money laundering and the financing of terrorism is a kind of a hurdle to the development of the digital services. But listening to the interview you had before, make it that our systems should be prepared in order to avoid that the financial system is misused in order to, with an end to financing terrorism or laundering capitals. And it is back in 2021 that the Commission offered a revision, a regulatory revision, reviewing all the rules that concern, let's say, this area. And in addition to rules, to material laws, there's also a part that is dedicated in this reform to the creation of a body at European level, an authority. It's called AML authority. So to make it simpler, I'll call it AMLA, which will be in charge of being a supervisor of the financial sector, not the whole industry, but part of the financial industry, the coordinator of supervision methods in this area, and which also a second pillar, the first pillar, the supervision, and the second pillar will be concerning the financial intelligence unit. I have it in French, the equivalent in French, and the authority as well will be not being at the same time not being a CRF, to coordinate the CRF's activities established in the member states and facilitate the joint analysis. We know the major cases of money laundering and the smaller cases have a cross-border aspect to it. That was for the institutional part, and for the regulatory part, we will have the first regulation in that area. Up to now, we've had a series of 5 directives, and as you know, the directives are going to be translated by the member states. And we thought by 2021 we made the proposal. We believe that the environment was mature enough to offer a regulation, and therefore regulations that are directly applicable in all member states. And the time is short, but I will try to just say a few words about what the regulation allows and facilitates in terms of use of digital methods in the digital world. We've had discussions with Stéphane that was back in 2018, 2019. We tried to look at what is not working well in our legislation. We tried to address it and offer the possibility to the entities that have obligations in terms of the anti-money laundering to use tools, but the legislation at European level as national level is what we call in English technological ignorance. So if you look at the directive and the regulation, we have obligations for the private sector, and directive, we have obligations for the member states to establish the framework that helps fighting against this in an efficient way. If you look at both instruments, you will not find in there suggestions of which tools to use, and for the reason of neutrality, but also on the fact that this area is actually being developed as we speak. And to give you an example, back in 2021, when the Commission proposed this legislative text, we didn't know the NFTs had not been invented or were not popular. That was the very beginning. And during the negotiations, we saw this development of that. And it was also the case for many other aspects. And this is why the legislation is neutral from a technology point of view. The entities that are subject to that will be able to use these tools to ensure that their vigilance measures against their clients when you do the KYC is efficient. And before I conclude, I'd like to say that we're still waiting for the formal adoption of this major package. We'll have a vote in the European Parliament in April, a vote in the Council in May, and I hope that before the summer holidays, everyone will be able to read the text in the official bulletin. In any case, we'll be following this and this publication. Stéphane, maybe a word with you on requirements on AML. So they require the substantial level of security, while the framework of the European digital identity requires or asks for a high level. Was that a mistake? Well, I see you laughing. But tell me, do correct me if it's not the case. I wanted to make a comment because we know with Hanukkah for years now, and I was part of an expert group called ID&KYC, if I'm not mistaken. That was had a mandate from the Andreas Servida, who was at the helm, who's the father of the ENOS regulation, to try and find the means of using digital identity in the banking journeys at the time. And I remember that we came upon an inextricable complicity of KYC rules in Europe. It was just a real spaghetti plate. Each country was doing it differently. You have to remember that at the time, BaFin would identification via video at the time in France, and it was totally prohibited. So we have, with the future regulation, the AML regulation, it's extraordinary progress. I find that there were a lot of the ADAS regulation was highly already today. We talked a lot about ADAS. I think that would be worth talking about the KYC aspect of the AML regulation, because the unification of KYC rules in Europe for all countries, for all banks, for all subject entities is just a gigantic topic, because it's going to allow for common rules, some suppliers to generate service providers that will have the European footprint, the critical size in Europe. So it is a major step in making banking and financing space in Europe, and we really need it. And Hanukkah, honestly, I admire the work that you've done. I'm sincere about it. We shall see in details, and not everything is ready yet. There's still a lot of rules, application rules to be made. We will see how MLA will deal with the regulations of KYC, but on the principle, I think that this is absolutely fundamental progress. Now, it will position the rules, the AML rules, as the second pillar or the second alternative for the development of digital identity solutions. If I take the example, we talked this morning about BConnect. BConnect, which is the authentication solution shared by, let's say, the carte bancaire group, major banks. This is totally outside EDAS. This is based on implicit, necessarily based on KYC rules that will be not only defined at French level, but at European level. So it's an immense breakthrough. This is remarkable, but as we said this morning, for any contact, the level of reference is not the minimum guarantee, is not the high level that is provided for wallets, but it's a substantial level. Now, what can we say about this? Well, how do you perceive these two elements, these two approaches that are different? Well, actually, it's very logical. When you look at the banking side, honestly, the substantial level already is progressed with reference to the current situation. Currently, in Europe, and even in France, we are below the substantial level for opening a bank account. You have to, there's something that we should remind you of, that if you're already in a very banking, well, if you already have a banking account, you can open a second one just with a scan of your ID. As easy as that. It's provided for by the monetary code in France. So the substantial level is, I think, logical, consistent, and it is the French rules as we speak. So it's already recognized in France. That's good. It's not the same level as the high level for EUDI wallets. We'll see how they're going to manage or not manage the payment use case, but it's going to be a hurdle, I'm sure.
And synergies between these two regulations we are talking with Raluca Alexandra.
I haven't counted, but my guess would be if you open the anti-money laundering regulation, you could probably find the word identity, I don't know, maybe 40 times, maybe, let's say between 30, 50 times, I could imagine, because yeah, identity, the verification of the identity is a major element of the Know Your Customer and customer due diligence requirements. And that's also a reference actually to the wallets in the recitals of the regulation. And that's quite interesting because it says that when the European Digital Identity Wallet is used for identification, this may present a standard of a low or a standard level of risk. So that's, I mean, even though AMLR is of course technologically neutral, this is, I would say, a positive reference to the wallet that might make it easier for companies to verify the identity of clients across the union. So I think there can be great synergies between the two frameworks.
Raluca Alexandra, peut-être.
Hanukkah Alexandra, maybe a complementary comment between the synergy of these two. Well, I must say that the regulations are different because it's a different domain of regulation, but they're really complementary and really there is synergy. As Sabine said, even if the KYC rules, customer due diligence, are very elaborate today, there will be the same rules everywhere in the European Union. So it will no longer be possible as it is today. There I have a bank account in France, but I want to open I want to open in the group in Bulgaria, and the same bank group asked me for the full Monty to demonstrate who I am. And it's true that in the considerations of the regulations, in the recitals of the electronic wallet, and this, even if it's not an obligation, we realize that this is an incentive for customers to use this possibility in European law so that the KYC is simplified and customers are considered as a low-risk customer. And with the new regulation, we will try and address fragmented market situations. We know, for example, that there are situations in which someone who has worked in France but then wants to live, let's say, in Germany, and has a pension in France and lives in Germany, it gets complicated. So you have some time to use workarounds to be able to benefit from the interior market. With the new regulation, we hope that we're going to put an end to this fragmentation. But as Stefan highlighted, we shouldn't be celebrate too much about it. The regulation is not applicable yet. We have to wait for another 3 years. And within 3 years, we will not just be waiting, but the new authority is going to develop detailed technical standards of what we have in the regulation. The regulation gives the framework, a rather detailed framework for KYC, and it's simplified or enhanced, but in the future authority is going to, in what they're going to develop, there'll be a complex map that make it that there is no de-risking, and there is an easy onboarding, let's put it that way. Stefan, and the control of Hanukkah, but for the normal risk situation, for example, the regulation already defines the attributes that are going to be required. So there's already a level of details that is specified. That is a great breakthrough compared with the previous situation. And honestly, it can only be very positive about this unification, harmonization of European rules. Maybe, Stefan, a complement of what you've started talking about the impact of these two regulations on anything to do with e-commerce and payment. Well, on payment, there's no doubt about the fact that payments are at the core of the concerns of the anti-laundering. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but for reasons that can be easily understood, when no one can tolerate that the payment operations are used for as a needy solutions for illegitimate operations. It's obvious. It's always been the case. This is no change. In terms of digital identity, we mentioned it this morning and in early afternoon about the use case of payment of future DI wallet. It is clear that there is a junction between the two. The contours of this link between the two are not clearly defined yet, because the implementation text, both of IDAS and AMLA regulations, are not been defined yet. But there will probably be wallets, IDAS 2 wallets, with a payment feature. Will they cover all the payment use case? There's nothing sure about that. But will we have also solutions of IDAS, outside IDAS banking solutions that probably develop and take advantage of the fact that KYC is harmonized? There will probably be, let's say that there will be clearly, definitely, a major impact on both regulations on payment operations. And if you add the new regulations of the future regulation on payment, and in the longer term, the provisions of the digital euro, which is very likely that it will be implemented, there'll be an ecosystem that is going to be created We don't know all, we don't know its shape yet, but it's obvious that this ecosystem will be definitely impacted by ADAS and AML regulation.
So ADAS, we know that we have the list of trusted services with the digital attributes that need to be processed by the banks. What role do you see in this process of anti-money laundering? Well, the ADAS regulation says that beyond the PIDs, the personal identification data, the civilian data, if you will, can be hosted in the digital wallets, and these are attributes more of status, belonging, for example, to a certain eligibility or a certain company or latitude of an asset, or so we think of the IBANs for banks, for example. It's an attestation so there's a whole number of attestations for which banks are the legitimate, have the legitimate attributions. Now, let's take an IBAN, for example, and take a scenario of the fact that, let's say, you didn't have a payment incident over the last year, for example. That this could be a completely it could be a service that's provided by the banks that would allow you to secure interactions. And now will the banks take this opportunity? Will they seize this opportunity? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe some will, maybe not all of them, but we'll see. There's no obligation, at least no, not to my knowledge, there's no major obligation that the banks give digital or electronic attestations, but I think it's something that the banks might be interested in doing.
Preparation. How can we prepare this arrival of the regulation?
Yes, that's maybe my invite to all of you to participate in providing us your views and your advice. So we published the architecture and reference framework on GitHub and also the reference application. So please comment on GitHub. Also reach out to us at the Commission bilaterally if you prefer to do that, because this year will be very important to us. We have a very short deadline to draft the implementing acts with the core functions of the wallets. And we can't do it alone. We need input from the industry. We want input from the industry. So maybe that's my call to you to help us to come up with implementing acts that will make the wallets workable and useful.
A call to share and a call to action. Ralouk Alexandra, peut-être un mot également sur cette préparation, on l'a compris.
Okay, a call to action. Okay, as you said, there's a lot to be done with the anti-money laundering package. How can we prepare for this? Well, as I said earlier, there will be an authority that would put into place an anti-money laundering authority, and that authority will start working on the norms, the technological standards, as Stefan said, to be able to have a list, a detailed list, more detailed than what we have currently in the regulations, the list of attributes that must be presented so that to allow electronic identification very easily. So we have deadlines that have been set in the regulations. They're not, we have 24 months, for example, for developing that list of attributes. So it's not a tight deadline. And we, as Sabine said, there will be consultation with the public to get feedback from the various actors, also with the business world, the industry, citizens. Everybody's invited to participate in the discussion and to share their experience of KYC and we have different experiences with KYC in the different member states. So as that being said, just with a strong participation, could we or will we be able to, at the agency level, and then the Commission as well, afterwards will adopt these technological standards and norms, but please help us to help you. That's my message. And Alexandra, you talked about the NFTs, the notion of NFTs, which are currently emerging. You're starting to work with Richard on these regulations now that it's been reinforced. And are there elements that might change on this subject in the regulations that exist today? I gave the example of the NFTs not because we were able to integrate them, because it's rather complicated. We've not been able to integrate hosted or unhosted wallets. It's not, we can put anything in a regulation if we want, but when we put something into a regulation, then what we put in, I don't know how to say it in French, but it has to be enforceable. So we don't know how to do, we don't know how to enforce these regulations in a technological or a technical way. There's no way to sort of check and control these unhosted hosted wallets. So we've looked at all of the entities that are subject to these regulations, and we're looking at, in the digital regulations, we have a clause that says, in England we call it a review clause, and in 5 years we'll review the regulations and see if we can put into place updates to the various initiatives in this area. So just to reassure everyone, we can't say that the framework is not complete. It is very complete with the level of information that we currently have, but with that clause that states that we will review and revise and update the regulation in 5 years. So this is why we ask from everybody in the market, in the industry, and in the general public to give us their feedback. So we're looking at a deadline of 2027. Yes, the deadline is 2027, but we're waiting to have the regulations, the directive, which we called the level 1 framework regulation. And then in the next 3 years, the agency will, the AMLAT authority will have developed an impressive number of technological standards, and that way we will sort of complete the regulatory framework by 2027.
UID?
Yeah, we will now focus on drafting the implementing acts and on specific topics. We will focus on the core functionalities of the wallet and the trust model, so that are the requirements for the relying parties, certification, and if we manage, also on the electronic attestations of attributes. And we have a tight timeline, so it's foreseen that we adopt the implementing act 6 months after the entry into force of the regulation. So let's say we should adopt them in December, and then member states have 2 years to issue the wallets.
Thank you, Sabine. Stéphane, vouliez ajouter quelque chose?
Oui, je voulais simplement dire sur la...
I just wanted to add that in terms of the M&M regulations, we would, as you know, the KYC processes are quite heavy, they're complex, they're costly, especially for the establishments that are subject to them. So the big players, and I worked in a huge bank, in a big bank, a French European bank. So I worked, so the big establishments have no difficulty, well, to say no difficulty, let's say they have the means. They have the means to manage all that. They have resources that are sufficient and can be mobilized. Now, for the smaller establishment, I think it's a real subject to respect the KYC regulations in general. And there, I would say that there's a real opportunity generated by the unification of the KYC regulations that are being developed, or to really put or bring on board the KYC utilities. That's the case in Belgium. You have the Isabel group, which has a solution that goes really in that direction. And we could do that. We could provide a better quality service that's more efficient at lower cost. that's certainly something that could provide service to the community of establishments that are subject to these regulations, as well as their customers, which is not a negligible population. So I think that the implementation of the IMM regulations is a tremendous opportunity to develop a real KYC industry and an anti-money laundering industry that would really establish world-class standards. Anything to add? I'm just listening, but you're absolutely right. The KYC does cost a lot, and if the argument that we hear each time for the recent years is that KYC costs a lot, we say it's even more costly to have to exit the market. Now, we had a lot of big players that exit the market. Now, that's more of an exceptional case, but I'm very much interested in listening, especially for the smaller establishments that are subject. I got to tell you, it's a real issue for them now. All the big legal firms are, the big legal firms, can handle those costs, but that's not the case for the smaller firms or the notaries, for example. These are quite often small establishments that, and so there's a lot of actors in the non-financial sector where it's very costly for them. But having said that, if you have to pay, you have to pay. Now, as we're saying, we're going to try to find the means to listen to the industry and to integrate into the technological standards and norms that are being developed, to develop really the best practices, some things that have already existed. For example, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure that best practices do exist already, all the while remaining neutral. I don't know about Isabel in Belgium, but we could maybe find a way to encourage these best practices. I propose, unless you want to add anything, Stefan, the name of the solution is Cube, but I'm not paid by Isabel to promote it. So maybe we can take some questions from our guests. Guy, yeah, there's a question. We can give him a microphone, please. Yes, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Stefan, Luca, and Sabine. Thank you for this very interesting exchange. I don't have one question, I have three. But they're quick. I'm going to try to formulate them quickly. First question, maybe for you, Luca. You talked about the history of the AML regulations, the 5 or 6 directives on this subject. And the question I want to ask is, does the regulation, or is the regulation, an improvement on those directives in a context where the situation itself has improved quite a bit? So it's one more improvement. Or, on the contrary, is the context of financial fraud and money laundering, have they become more and more problematic? And this regulation is a way to react more firmly to a situation that is becoming more and more critical. So that's my first question. Maybe I give you my 3 questions, and then you can answer as you will. The second question is on the register of unique beneficiaries, because if I understood correctly, I think there's big differences between the ways in which different countries maintain this type of registry. And I don't think it's to France's honor to say this, but I think there's a lot of questions with regard to those registries, and there's questions of opportunity, as you said, about digital identification, also consentment in terms of private data. Do you have a vision or an idea on this notion of harmonization with regard to these beneficiaries? That's the second question. And then the third question that I wanted to ask is between DG Connect and DG FISMART. When you look at these cross impacts of these different regulations, have you seen, do you have working groups working on these subjects on this period where we're going to really work on the implementation of these regulations? Thank you. I just will respond briefly ahead of Raluca, but I think we have to remember that for KYC in the current context of the fifth directive, there was practically nothing on the content of KYC in the fifth directive. So we were in a situation where each member state was doing pretty much what they wanted. So I'm sort of I don't think I'm characterizing the situation. So when you look at the member states that have almost you go from a scheme where the member states can do pretty much anything they want, and now we're moving towards a system and it's a huge system where everything is more harmonized. Now the question is, the framework currently better? Well, it's better than with the fifth directive than it was before. But that's why we proposed regulations, as Stefan mentioned, that where we have rules that are directly applicable throughout Europe. KYC has sort of the same demands, if you will. Now, to defend the member states, I would say that just for transposing the fourth directive, and it was a very short deadline, a very short time frame. We had the fourth directive, which is a very complex instrument, and then we had the Bataclan terrorist attack, and the Commission had to quickly propose modifications, quick fixes, if you will. And so we had the fifth directive. But it's a big step forward, but I think we still have to wait a little bit because the new rules are not yet applicable. Now, for the registries of real beneficiaries, this is also a big challenge for the member states because, as you know, in November 2022, the European Union's Court of Justice rendered invalid the current what was currently requested under the framework. But there was a validation of access, of indiscriminate access of any member of the public to the registry. And so they said that for reasons of Article 7 and 8 of the protection of private data, they could only access the registry if they show legit or prove legitimate interest. And so this is something that's now in the new regulatory framework. And how can you define legitimate interest? And how can we make things simpler? For example, how can you have mutual recognition? Because the court invalidated, but also identified the groups where there was a sort of presumption, sort of quasi-legal presumption of legitimacy, like journalists, the press, anybody who could enter into a business relationship with any other person, which means pretty much everybody. So journalists, I've already mentioned, associations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations that work within these domains. So it's quite a broad domain. And as I said, there was a sort of mutual recognition that if I'm a journalist and I'm doing an investigation into an AML affair in France, then if I need to look at the registry of Luxembourg or Germany, I shouldn't have to go through the same process again. So, and then you have the registries of the different member states, notably France. Following this declaration or this decree by the court, it decided to diminish the risk of litigation. They tried in the beginning to close their registries and to do changes that were, well, I'm a jurist myself, so I'm not a specialist in IT, but to change an IT registry or an IT architecture of a registry on the basis of legitimate interest, I think that required significant work for each of the member states. And between then, with all of these difficulties that I recognize and fully excuse for all of the member states, it's important to say that very clearly, we're working for the integration of all these registries. All these registries will be integrated. They're already integrated, not in the best way possible, but they are integrated throughout the European level. And I'll let Sabine talk about the cooperation.
Very good. Of course, in my case, I'm lucky because, as I mentioned before, I worked in the anti-money laundering unit before. So, of course, it's easy for me to reach out to the colleagues and for the colleagues to reach out to me. But in general, that's how we work at the Commission. So, in general, DG FISMA and DG Connect consult each other. Just to give you an example, the guidelines on remote onboarding, for example, then, of course, DG FISMA is in charge. They send it to us. We can comment, or we have a meeting, we discuss. And that's basically the usual process at the Commission.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. On a une autre question.
D'abord, je voulais...
Okay, another question. I just wanted to confirm that there's a real urgency for European harmonization. At the Council, we have, for example, we have a lot of customers that want to have to Europanize their activities for their customers, and so they need to consult all the national regulations, translate them, and then simulate them, as well as the directives, the national directives for their own country. And so it's very complicated because, for example, a French person that wants to access a bank in Belgium, if they're not a resident in Belgium because they don't have a Belgian ID card or they don't have the authentication or identification requirements, they're not able to open an account in Belgium. So
to the link between MLA and EIDAS 2. In fact, the first impact is about attributes electronic attestations. Sure, that will be helpful, and I have well understood that also ADEPS will look at very carefully at the type of attributes that will be authorized according to the risk and the level, because it should be proportionate to the risk level for MLA. But there's another big issue. It's about remote customer onboarding. You have just, in fact, today there's only the EBA guideline that is very far from the positions of, for instance, from the NC that with a specification pivot, because there's a very high issue regarding deepfakes and very easy. You have all the tools on the web to make a remote identity proofing with an easy attack. So it's very urgent to make a common position between DG Connect and DG FISMA about remote onboarding that can be resistant to the high level of attacks, and you can look at the latest ENISA guidelines about remote identification status on the latest deepfake attacks. So sure that that is a very urgent matter, because if you open remote onboarding with easy attack with deepfakes and so on, you will have big issues of terrorist attacks or money laundering.
Yeah, thank you very much for mentioning that, because I am aware that today there was also a lot of skepticism towards the wallets, but I think this is one point where the wallets will be super helpful, because they will be at the level of assurance high. I know there are also downsides to us, but this is definitely a plus side, that it will be more difficult to manipulate it, and it will be a safe way for identification, and it will help businesses to get new customers across the union. You know, that's exactly the issue that we will address with the wallet.
Raluca, vous vouliez rajouter un point?
Moi, j'ai rien à ajouter. J'étais à l'écoute.
Raluca, you have anything to add? No, I agree with everything. I was just happy to listen. I have nothing to add. There's a sort of mapping of all the EBA products. I think they've done what they could. I'm not going to defend them, but all of this will be reviewed and updated with the regulatory framework that we have. So I've noted your point. Thank you, Raluca. Is there a final question for this session? If not, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Sabine. Thank you, Raluca. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you for all of you for being here and for clarifying the details on these regulations. There's a lot of things that are changing, and it's really happening at the European level. So thank you very much for sharing with us the progress you've made and the work you're doing, and thank you for sharing with us. Thank you for staying with us. Guy, you presented this morning, you mentioned it this morning. We have a cocktail at 5 p.m. just outside this room. We'd be delighted to talk with you in a more informal and convivial setting. So if our guests could feel inclined to stay. Otherwise, I will see you tomorrow at 9:30 with Eric Saboulier, the president of the Human Technology Foundation, where we're going to talk about the human being in the heart of this digital transformation. So we're going to put the human being at the heart of issues such as security and protection. It was a real pleasure to be with you here. I really wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful evening here in Lille, and see you later.